Submaximal exercise. The main energy system used during submaximal exercise is the aerobic system. The aerobic glycolysis system is a complex process and takes a couple of minutes to become dominant during the start of a run due to its complexity, and that it takes longer to produce ATP compared to the ATP PC store. And the anaerobic glycolysis system. The anaerobic systems are dominant within the first minute or so, as they are a quick release of energy and are available immediately in the muscles, whereas the aerobic system has to break down glycogen into glucose, and eventually that will be broken down through Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain into 38 available ATP that the muscles can use. Submaximal characteristics. During this submaximal exercise, the performer will most likely have a high VO2 max. This is because they are able to work for long periods of time whilst maintaining a good speed. A reason for this is because they use their oxygen very effectively. Runners in a marathon, for example, as shown in the picture, also have a high power output over a long duration. This means that they are able to enjoy using power over a whole run, and they are less likely to slow down. During submaximal exercise, the muscle oxidative capacity is much higher, as there is a higher capacity to use oxygen in the muscles, as it is less intense than, say, maximal exercise. Another characteristic of submaximal exercise is economical technique. This greatly affects who performs at this level. To be a high quality performer for submaximal exercise, it is necessary that you have a high level of economic running. For runners who are better economical running, it means that they are less likely to fatigue faster. This is because performers who have odd running technique, like springing in their step, or very short steps, or extremely large strides, can mean that they are wasting more energy, which is extremely important for endurance athletes, as they need to conserve as much energy as possible. If there is a high economy of oxygen, e.g. a good breathing technique, not short breaths or very fast breaths, but deep breaths allowing oxygen to be diffused properly, will mean that oxygen can be transported to the muscles much more efficiently, meaning working for longer. Non-functional weight is also an important characteristic of running in submaximal exercise. An example of non-functional weight is a lot of muscle or a lot of fat, for example. A person carrying a lot of fat is less likely to do well, as they are carrying extra body weight. During running, the performer carries their entire body weight with each step. If they are overweight, this will mean that they have to run with more weight, almost like running with a backpack of weights on. It puts more stress on the muscles, meaning they have to work harder, meaning that they're going to use more ATP, and therefore the stores will deplete quicker, and therefore fatigue will occur faster. This is also very similar in people with a lot of muscle, as performers who have lots of muscle is unnecessary for running long distances, as again you're carrying extra body weight. Typically, most submaximal performers have an ectomorphic body type. This means that they carry a low percent of body fat and are very lean. They attempt to weigh as little as possible at the top tier of athletes for this category of exercise. Energy sources. The main energy source that is used in low intensity high duration exercise is fat stores and carbohydrate stores. At the start of the exercise, the glycogen will be broken down to produce ATP as a result of carbohydrates we've taken in. However, it is more beneficial for the athlete to use fats as a source of energy, as fats can produce a really great amount of ATP and has a high yield of ATP. However, this process does take some time and cannot be used straight away, and it also uses a bit of energy. Also, near the end of submaximal exercise that requires a lot of energy for a longer period of time, such as a marathon, the energy source may change as a result of depletion of those stores, and thus the body may have to go to protein as an energy source. This is a bad thing, as it means that the body is using muscle to gain energy. Waste products. There are many waste products that are brought about as a result of submaximal exercise, such as water. Water is released from sweating during submaximal exercise. This is due to thermoregulation and heat. This is the body's way of attempting to cool the body down during exercise. The body wants to cool down during exercise because lots of muscles, especially the legs when running, are contracting constantly. A byproduct of muscle contraction, another waste product, is heat. Heat builds up, and due to homeostasis, which is what the body wants to have a balance throughout. The body wants to stay at a certain temperature, but due to the increase in heat, the body has to lose some via vasodilation and sweating. When sweating, the body releases a lot of water, and this can cause dehydration. Dehydration can cause problems for submaximal performers because it leads to a change in viscosity of the blood. Blood plasma is made up of liquids and water and helps to carry useful and waste products through the blood. If water is lost through sweating, then there is less water in the plasma to carry nutrients around the body. It makes the blood more thick and sludgy, meaning it's harder to expel carbon dioxide and deliver oxygen to the muscles. In a marathon, the average water loss is about 1 litre per mile. 1 litre per hour. The runner cannot drink this amount when running, so they will always be slightly dehydrated. However, to combat this problem, runners can have drinks along the marathon and also attempt to cool themselves down by throwing water over their face, which will attempt to cool the body, meaning less sweating. If a performer becomes too hydrated, then it can lead to more serious problems like fainting and blood loss to the head, etc., and even in some cases death. Another waste product in submaximal exercise is carbon dioxide. When exercising, the muscles are in demand of more oxygen in order to carry on contracting, and also in the process of inhaling more oxygen and muscles contracting, this results in more CO2 being produced. The CO2 build-up is not good for the body because the body has to attempt to transport this CO2, and this leads to lowering the pH, meaning more acidic. The body likes homeostasis, so an increase in acidity is not preferable for the body. This waste product, however, is likely not to be such a problem in submaximal exercise, as waste products can be expelled from the body through exhalation in aerobic situations. The respiratory exchange ratio during submaximal exercise is around 0.7 to 0.75. This is because during submaximal exercise there is a lot more oxygen being used compared to that of anaerobic exercise. Also, the main energy system being used during low intensity hydration is dominantly fats. To start with, in sports such as a marathon, the performer will use carbohydrates to start with as a main form of energy. However, as the performer is working for an extensively long period of time, this allows the breakdown of fats into energy to occur. Breaking down fats for an energy source is extremely beneficial as it has a very high yield of ATP, although it is a long process. It can produce around 129 ATP. Therefore, for runners, it is optimal to use fats as a main energy source. Also, all athletes have a good amount of fat on them, even if they are super skinny lean runners. They will always be able to break down the fat into ATP. A main cause of fatigue during submaximal exercise is glucose and glycogen depletion. During long submaximal exercise, such as a marathon, the levels of glucose that are broken down in the prep steps, Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain to produce lots of energy. The glucose can become depleted. This can happen from long periods of exercise. The ATP will be used due to the high number of constant contractions being made by the performer, and as more ATP gets used, there is less of it until eventually there is no more glycogen to be converted and the energy source has to switch. It is bad for the body to not have a constant source of carbohydrate, as that is the main fuel for the body. As there is no more glycogen to convert, the body will struggle to make a lot of ATP unless the energy source changes to fats or protein. There are ways in which performers who do marathons, for example, combat glucose depletion. Running out of glucose or depletion of glucose is known in a marathon as hitting the wall. It is an intense struggle whereby the body has no energy and performers appear to collapse and struggle to walk and even stand. So, to prevent this, athletes can take glucose supplements, glucose ingestion, throughout the run in short bursts or sources of energy such as liquid gels or jelly beans, which provide a good hit of sugar and spike in glucose. This will help performers to avoid hitting the wall. Another way in which fatigue can be avoided is by a process called glucose ingestion. This is when the performer will ingest glucose before an event. The purpose of doing this is to prolong the fatigue that occurs from the exercise. A performer will take sugars to spike the blood glucose, meaning that there is enough energy. As you can see in the figure on the left, there is a control group taking no carbohydrates and a group taking carbohydrates. You can see that the carbohydrate group started with a high level of glucose at 7 millimoles per litre, compared to that of the control group, which had a glucose level of around 5 millimoles per litre. The graph also shows that the control group did not sustain a high level of glucose for a long period of time, and the end levels of glucose was much lower in comparison to the group taking carbs. Control ended at around 3.5 millimoles per litre, and carbs at around 5.5 millimoles per litre. This tells us that taking carbohydrates means that our glucose levels will be higher, and we will be able to sustain a higher level till finish also. This is beneficial for exercise, as it means that they have a high level of glucose that can be converted into more ATP energy, meaning that they can work for harder and for longer. Also, the graph shows that the control group were unable to exercise for as long compared to the carb group. They worked for 130 minutes compared to 180 minutes, thus telling us that athletes would benefit from taking carbs before an event, as they can work for longer. The figure on the right shows us the percent of glycogen content and how it varies during exercise, and the length of time of the exercise. You can see that depending on the intensity of the exercise, the glycogen content will vary. For example, at heavy exercise, which is indicated by the blue line on the graph, you can see that the glycogen content becomes depleted very quickly, and the rate at which glycogen content is used up is very fast, and depleted by about 60 minutes. However, you can see that moderate exercise results in a longer period of time that the glycogen content is maintained. It is a more steady curve, and the length of time it takes to deplete the glycogen store is 120 minutes. The reason why the heavy exercise depletes the store quicker is due to the demands of the exercise. In heavy exercise, the performer will want muscles to contract more forcefully and at a faster rate. The stress, such as in powerlifting for example, the stress on the muscles will be much higher, and the level of ATP energy that will be required by the body will be higher in comparison to moderate exercise, such as a game of football. The moderate exercise will still require a high level of energy, but not as much so compared to heavy exercise. On the other hand, light exercise is the complete opposite in terms of the percent of glycogen depletion during exercise. As you can see in the diagram, there is almost 100% glycogen content throughout the whole 120 minutes of exercise, and it barely changes. A reason for this is the demand of the exercise is much less, and that an example could be a walk, for example, which doesn't require nearly as much energy as weightlifting or a game of football. Fatigue is fat stores. Fat is a great source of energy and will take a long time to convert fat into ATP energy. However, the reward is very beneficial and provides the body with lots of ATP, but it does require a bit of energy. However, the depletion of fat stores can lead to fatigue, as there is no longer any more ways to make ATP, and the body must have ATP in order to carry out a muscle contraction. Therefore, if there is a depletion of fat stores, it may result in fatigue occurring more quickly, as when the body runs out of energy sources and then the fat store is depleted, then there is no energy for muscles to contract, thus fatigue occurring faster. There is also neuromuscular fatigue. There is a point in exercise whereby muscles are receiving signals from the brain to contract, however they are physiologically incapable to do so. There are multiple hypotheses as to why this occurs. Firstly, the muscle runs out of energy. ATP is the main source of energy, and during exercise, research has shown that there is still a lot of ATP left over, and therefore that this is not as likely as the other hypotheses to be the reason why we fatigue neuromuscularly. Secondly, the reason for fatigue could be due to a build-up of waste products. A build-up of the acidity can cause an inhibition of the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This could have an impact on sliding filament theory, as calcium triggers the contraction as calcium binding to troponin, which causes the tropomyosin to move. However, if calcium release is inhibited, this is prevented, and therefore sliding filament theory cannot take place. No cross bridge can be formed, therefore no muscle contraction. Another possible neuromuscular fatigue is the disturbance of excitation-contraction coupling. This is if something goes wrong or inhibits the pathway between muscles. junction and the brain, then the muscle contraction will not take place.